Before we begin, hit subscribe, drop a like, and stay until the end, because once you hear what really happened in this case, you'll question everything you know about justice. He spent 30 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Then this happened. The night that changed everything. It was a cold February evening in 1992 when sirens tore through the narrow streets of Dayton, Ohio. Police cruisers flooded the neighborhood after a frantic 911 call reported a young woman found dead behind an old laundromat. 22-year-old Angela Rourke, a college student with no known enemies, had been strangled, her belongings scattered across the alley. Within hours, the city was buzzing with fear. The media called it the laundromat murder. Detectives were under pressure. The mayor demanded results, and the public wanted a suspect before sunrise. That's when the name Michael Gray came up, a quiet, soft-spoken mechanic who lived 2 blocks away and occasionally used the laundromat's machines. He had no prior record, but a shaky eyewitness claimed they saw a man with his build leaving the scene. It was all the police needed. Within 48 hours, Michael was handcuffed in front of his family, his face splashed across the evening news as the prime suspect. The case moved fast, too fast. Investigators ignored contradictory statements. The forensics were inconclusive, but the prosecutor told the jury they had found fibers consistent with the victim's sweater. Michael's court-appointed lawyer barely fought back. The trial lasted less than a week. The verdict came in after just 3 hours of deliberation: guilty of second-degree murder. Michael Gray was sentenced to life in prison. Behind bars, Michael clung to one phrase: "I didn't do it." But to most, it sounded like the same old story every convict tells. He wrote letters, hundreds of them, to journalists, innocence projects, anyone who would listen. Most never wrote back. The few that did gave him polite denials. The years blurred together. He watched the world change through a television in the prison common room, cell phones, the internet, wars, and still no one believed him. Then came 2019. A new district attorney took office, promising transparency and reform. One of her first acts was reopening cold cases where DNA evidence could be retested using modern technology. Michael's case landed on the desk of Detective Erin Mallory, a young but relentless investigator who had grown up believing in second chances. When Erin read the file, something didn't sit right. The fiber evidence was weak. The eyewitness recanted in a buried letter years later. And buried deep in the evidence box was a sealed envelope marked "Biological Material, Do Not Destroy." Inside, there was a swab taken from beneath Angela Rourke's fingernails, never tested. For the first time in 3 decades, there was a sliver of hope. Erin sent the evidence to the state crime lab. Weeks passed with no update. Michael, now gray-haired and frail, sat in his cell, afraid to believe. After all, hope had betrayed him before. But on a quiet Monday morning, Erin's phone rang. The lab technician's voice trembled as he spoke. "Detective, we got a hit." She froze. "A hit? On who?" The answer sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't Michael Gray. The DNA matched a man who had died in 2012, a convicted serial offender from a neighboring state. But before Erin could make her next move, something unexpected happened at the prison. Something that made her question if clearing Michael's name might expose a deeper, darker truth buried in the justice system itself. The man who knew too much. When Detective Erin Mallory received the lab results, she felt both triumph and dread. After 30 years, she had hard proof that Michael Gray was innocent. The DNA from the victim's fingernails matched Earl Denton, a drifter and small-time criminal who died in a prison hospital 7 years earlier. On paper, the case was solved. But something didn't make sense. Earl had never been questioned, never listed as a suspect, and somehow, his name had been erased from the 1992 police database. Erin pulled the old case files again, spreading them across her desk. Every photo, every statement, every fingerprint card told a story of shortcuts and silence. The lead detective back then, Captain Ron Givens, had retired years ago with honors. He'd built his reputation on solving the laundromat murder. If Michael was innocent, that meant Givens' biggest career victory was a lie. She started digging into Givens' record and found something buried in archived news clippings. Earl Denton had once been arrested for assault just months before Angela's murder in the same neighborhood. His charges had been dropped for lack of evidence. Erin's gut tightened. That wasn't coincidence. That was cover-up. Meanwhile, inside the Ohio State Correctional Facility, word spread that Michael's case might be reopened. Inmates who once mocked him now treated him like a living ghost, half hero, half tragedy. But Michael didn't celebrate. He'd seen hope collapse before. Still, he noticed something strange. 2 correctional officers started watching him closely, One of them the same guard who'd lost his legal paperwork years ago. 3 days later, Michael was summoned to the warden's office. When he entered, he saw Erin sitting there, her badge glinting under the flickering fluorescent light. "Mr. Gray," she said gently, "we have something to talk about." For the first time in 30 years, someone spoke to him like a human being. Erin explained the DNA match and her intent to petition the court for his release. Michael didn't speak at first, he just stared at the table, trembling. "Detective," he finally whispered, "they won't let this happen. You don't know what they did." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Michael?" But before he could answer, the warden interrupted, his tone clipped and forced. "That's enough for today." Erin noticed the unease in his voice. The meeting had been cut short. Outside, she saw two officers exchanging quick glances as Michael was escorted back to his cell. That night, her phone rang again, unknown number. A rough male voice came through. "Detective Mallory, stop digging. That man's conviction was no mistake." Then the line went dead. The next morning, she drove to visit Captain Givens, now living quietly on a lakefront property. The old man greeted her with a tense smile. "Detective Mallory, you're stirring up ghosts." His words felt rehearsed, his eyes evasive. She pressed him about Earl Denton, but he brushed it off. Denton was a nobody. We had Gray nailed. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, an old framed photo on his mantel. It showed a younger Givens shaking hands with a city councilman, and in the background, barely visible, was Earl Denton, wearing a police uniform. Erin's pulse spiked. Earl Denton had been one of them, a temporary police informant, possibly shielded to protect the department. Back at the prison that same night, chaos broke out. An inmate fight, at least that's what the guards called it. But witnesses said Michael Gray wasn't fighting. He was being silenced. As Erin received the emergency call and sped toward the facility, sirens screaming through the night, one question burned in her mind: was she too late to save the only innocent man she'd ever met behind bars? The truth buried beneath the badges. By the time Detective Erin Mallory arrived at the Ohio State Correctional Facility, the air was thick with sirens and shouting. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed across the razor wire. Guards moved frantically through the yard, shouting codes over their radios. Erin pushed past them, her badge raised. "Where is he? Where's Michael Gray?" A medic shook his head before she even reached the infirmary. "Found him unconscious in the corridor. He's stable now, but barely." When she saw him, Michael's face was pale and bruised, oxygen tubes looped around his nose. A trembling nurse whispered, "He said, they came for him. He said they knew." Erin leaned closer, her jaw tight. "Who knew, Michael?" His eyes opened just enough to meet hers. The badge, it was one of them. Hours later, while Michael was kept under observation, Erin drove straight back to the precinct. She didn't ask permission. She broke into the evidence locker herself. There, in a cracked cardboard box marked Rourke Case, 1992, she found something that shouldn't have existed. A second forensic report, unsigned, dated 2 weeks before Michael's trial. The document stated that the biological evidence from under the victim's fingernails did not match the suspect. It had been deliberately hidden. That was the moment she knew. Michael hadn't just been wrongly convicted. He'd been framed to protect someone within the system. Erin confronted Captain Givens again the next morning. He looked older now, his voice shaking as he poured whiskey into his coffee. "You think you're the first one to find out?" he muttered. "There were orders, Detective. We were told to make the case stick. The city needed closure." Her voice was ice. "And you buried a man alive for 30 years? He stared out the window. "You think I don't see him every night when I close my eyes? But if I'd spoken up then, I'd be in a cell too." Erin left without another word. The next day, she submitted the hidden report to the district attorney and the Innocence Project. Within a week, the court vacated Michael's conviction. 30 years, gone in a paragraph of legal text. When he walked out of prison, the cameras were waiting. Reporters shouted his name, microphones surrounded him. But Michael didn't smile. He just looked up at the sky, blinking like a man seeing daylight for the first time. "They stole my life," he whispered, "but they won't steal my truth." Erin stood nearby, watching, knowing that freedom was only half the battle. A week later, she received an unmarked envelope at her office. Inside was a single photograph. Earl Denton standing beside 3 uniformed officers, one of them unmistakably Captain Givens. On the back, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were 5 words. He wasn't the only one. That night, Erin opened her laptop and started a new case file. Title: Operation Coverline, Internal Corruption Inquiry, 1990 to 1995. Because the man they framed wasn't the only innocent one. And the man who died wasn't the only guilty one. 3 months later, Captain Givens was found dead in his home, apparent suicide. But the note beside him read only, "The truth was never mine to tell." Erin stared at the crime scene photos, her reflection flickering in the glass. Justice had been served, but peace? That was another story entirely. She closed the file, turned off the light, and whispered to herself, "For every Michael Gray, how many are still in there?" Then she looked straight into the camera lens in her mind, the same lens your audience is watching through, and said, "If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe because the truth never sleeps."